Have you ever wondered why a man becomes most restless, not when you give him your heart, but when you take your energy away? Why his silence grows loudest when yours arrives first? Jung once observed that what we repress in ourselves does not vanish. It lives in the shadow, waiting for the moment when another human being forces it to the surface. And there are few forces more catalytic, more unsettling, than a woman who finally stops caring. When a woman withdraws her emotional investment, she unknowingly summons the buried truths of a man's psyche. His ego, once inflated by her attention, begins to fracture. In that crack, the shadow emerges, the envy he denies, the fear he conceals, the longing he disowns. He may not say it, but he feels it, a deep sense of loss that is not about her body alone, nor her presence, but about the mirror she held up to him. For in her gaze he glimpsed the man he wanted to be. When the gaze vanishes, so does the illusion, and he is left to face the raw reflection of himself. This is the secret women rarely see. Men often do not fear abandonment for love's sake, but for identity's sake. To be chosen by a woman validates him. To be ignored by her forces him to reckon with his own inadequacy. He will not admit this, of course, for the male ego is a fortress of denial. He will say she was too much, too cold, too demanding. Yet in the shadows of his sleepless nights, he replays her silence like a haunting refrain. He hides his obsession because it strips him of power. He hides his regret because to confess it would mean bowing before the truth, that her detachment hurt more than her presence ever did. Carl Jung spoke of the anima, the feminine soul within a man. When a woman pulls away, this anima becomes restless. It cries for integration, demanding he grow beyond conquest and pride. But most men resist this inner transformation. Instead, they project their longing outward, seeking other women, distractions, escapes. Still, none of it cures the void, because what he mourns is not only her, but the part of himself she awakened. And you, listening to this, might feel the weight of recognition. Perhaps you have watched a man spiral in silence after you withdrew your care. Perhaps you noticed how quickly his mask of strength cracked, how desperately he reached for you in subtle ways, through sudden messages, veiled anger, or strange attempts to regain control. It was not just love he craved. It was validation of his existence in your world. Without it, he felt like a shadow in his own life. What he hides most is vulnerability. Men are taught from boyhood to bury weakness, to cloak desire, to pretend indifference. But the psyche is not fooled. The shadow stores every unshed tear, every unspoken plea for closeness. And when a woman's silence arrives, it is as if the key turns in the lock, releasing all that was caged. His pride will not let him speak it. His image will not let him show it. Yet the truth remains. He is undone by the absence of care. This is why detachment is power. Not the cruel withdrawal of affection for manipulation, but the natural closing of the heart when it refuses to be dishonored. A woman who knows her worth does not beg, does not chase. She retreats into herself, and in that retreat, she becomes the most potent mirror of all. For in her silence, a man confronts what he cannot hide, from her or from himself. Think of the ancient Stoics who taught that the test of a person's strength is revealed in loss. Marcus Aurelius wrote that, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." When a man loses a woman's care, he faces the test of his mind. Does he crumble into bitterness? Does he hide behind new masks of arrogance? Or does he descend into his shadow, confront his wounds, and rise stronger? Most men do not choose the last path. Most prefer the safety of denial. They pretend indifference, but indifference is only the mask of obsession. They act as though they do not notice, yet every gesture of hers lingers like perfume in memory. What he hides is not hatred but hunger. What he conceals is not peace, but unrest. And you, if you have ever wondered why his energy shifted, Why his behavior grew strange after your detachment. It is because your absence exposed the truth he spends his life avoiding. That truth is this: without the mirror of the feminine, he is forced to face the emptiness within. There is a peculiar cruelty in silence, not because it intends harm, but because it denies the ego its favorite drug, attention. A man thrives on being the center of a woman's emotional orbit. When that gravity collapses, he is left floating in the void of his own psyche. In that void, his shadow lurks, hungry, whispering, demanding recognition. He may not realize it, but the restlessness he feels, the sudden emptiness that gnaws at him, is the voice of his shadow calling. Jung taught that the shadow contains everything disowned, every impulse and wound banished from the conscious mind. For men, this often includes the need for tenderness, the terror of inadequacy, the craving for unconditional acceptance. Society has long taught men to bury these truths, to project strength at any cost. But when a woman withdraws, these forbidden contents break free. He hides his need, disguising it as indifference. He hides his grief, cloaking it in anger. He hides his longing, distracting himself with hollow pursuits. Yet underneath, the shadow waits with patient cruelty, knowing it will not be ignored forever. This is why some men grow reckless when abandoned. Their behavior appears irrational. Sudden indulgence, desperate new conquests, reckless decisions. These are not signs of freedom, but symptoms of collapse. The withdrawal of care strips away the scaffolding of his ego. Without her presence, the false self he carefully constructed cannot hold. In the ruins, his unintegrated psyche writhes, demanding attention. He will not speak of it, for to admit it would destroy the illusion of strength he clings to, so he hides. But every act of hiding only enlarges the shadow. The woman, meanwhile, may feel the temptation to return, to soothe, to ease his suffering. But here lies the paradox. Every time she rescues him from his own abyss, she also shields him from transformation. Jung insisted that the path to individuation requires descent into darkness, confrontation with the shadow, and eventual integration. A man cannot grow if he is endlessly comforted out of his pain. Only by facing the emptiness her silence reveals can he awaken to his true self. And you, perhaps, have felt this dynamic, how quickly he returns when you detach. How suddenly he remembers your worth when your care evaporates. It is not mere romance that calls him back. It is the terror of facing himself alone. He fears his shadow more than he fears losing you. Yet it is precisely this fear that keeps him chained to the cycle of obsession and regret. Stoic wisdom aligns with this truth. Epictetus warned against clinging to what is not within our control. To depend on another for validation is to surrender sovereignty of the soul. Men who lose themselves in the gaze of a woman commit this error, and when that gaze withdraws, they are left disoriented, stripped of their imagined identity. Their hidden fragility is laid bare. The shadow becomes a mirror too sharp to endure. But silence, though it wounds, can also be merciful. For the man who dares to endure it without escape, it is the beginning of rebirth. He may begin to notice the lies he has told himself, the masks he has worn for approval. He may discover that what he sought in her was really the missing piece of his own psyche, the anima, the feminine principle within that he refused to acknowledge. If he is courageous, he will begin the work of integration, uniting the shadow with the self, no longer needing her validation to feel whole. Until then, however, he hides. He hides the obsessive thoughts that replay her absence like a melody that will not fade. He hides the jealousy that festers when he imagines her with someone else. He hides the bitterness that tastes like poison when he recalls her laughter, no longer his to claim. His words may be cold, but his shadow burns with fire. His actions may be distant, but his unconscious trembles with need. And you, do not mistake his silence for indifference. Do not be deceived by the masks he wears after you withdraw. He hides more than he shows. He fears more than he confesses. For the greatest secret of the male psyche is this: his shadow is never most alive when you are giving. But when you stop caring, the silence of a woman is never empty. It is full of unspoken truths, sharp as glass, weighty as stone. To a man accustomed to being fed by her devotion, this silence is unbearable. It awakens an ancient fear, the fear of irrelevance. Deep within his unconscious, the shadow whispers that he is disposable, that his value was never as great as he believed. The more he fights this whisper, the louder it grows, echoing in the chambers of his sleepless nights. Jung observed that what one resists not only persists, but strengthens. A man who resists the sting of abandonment multiplies its power. His denial feeds the very shadow he hopes to silence. So he buries his unrest beneath distractions, new faces, endless work, intoxications of every kind. Yet the shadow remains, patiently haunting him in the background, reminding him that he is not pursued, not desired, not seen. What he hides most fiercely is this: the terror of insignificance. A woman's care once shielded him from this truth. Her attention functioned as a mirror, reflecting back an image of worth, of desirability, of power. But when she retreats, the mirror shatters. He must look into the fragments, jagged and cruel, and see the raw face beneath the mask. That face is not the hero he imagined, not the conqueror he wished to be, but a man still untested, still incomplete. His shadow is filled with shame, and shame is the one emotion he cannot easily confess. The irony is cruel. He often blames her for the very silence that exposes him. He calls her heartless, cold, manipulative. Yet it was not her words but his own shadow that pierced him. She merely withdrew, reclaiming her energy. It was his ego that bled in the vacuum she left behind. What he hides is not that she abandoned him, but that without her attention, he abandoned himself. And you, if you have ever seen this unraveling, you know how quickly it twists. He may return with desperate affection, with sudden promises and pleas. He may accuse you of cruelty or claim you never truly cared. He may lash out or crumble. Yet beneath every mask, his shadow trembles with the same truth. He cannot stand the silence, because the silence unmasks him. The Stoics would call this a failure of inner sovereignty. Seneca taught that no man should depend on another for peace of mind, for to do so is to live enslaved. But many men, untrained in self-possession, tether their worth to a woman's gaze. When that tether is cut, they fall into themselves, and the fall is steep. The shadow devours them, not because she has destroyed them, but because they never built themselves. In these moments, his obsession grows in secret. He will not speak of it to his friends for fear of ridicule. He will not admit it to himself, for pride forbids it. But he stalks her memory in silence, reading old messages, revisiting places they once shared, inventing scenarios in which she returns. He becomes a prisoner of the very detachment he pretends to ignore. What he hides is the depth of his fixation, yet within this darkness lies potential. For some men, the absence of care becomes the catalyst for awakening. The silence forces them to confront their shadow, to admit what they have long denied, that the ego cannot sustain itself on borrowed energy. They begin painfully to do the work, shadow work, as Jung called it, bringing the hidden wounds into the light, facing the insecurity they once cloaked in arrogance. They discover that the feminine presence they longed for was not only outside, but also within, waiting to be acknowledged. Still, few take this path. Most retreat into the comfort of denial. They prefer the illusion of control, the pretense of indifference. They continue to hide, clinging to their masks, fearing the confrontation with their own emptiness. But the woman who stops caring, who walks away into her silence, has already written the truth across his soul. He cannot escape himself. And you, listening to these words, may feel both pity and power. Pity for the man who is undone by his own shadow. Power, for the woman who realizes that her silence is not weakness, but a mirror that no mask can withstand. When she stops caring, his secrets rise, and his shadow speaks for him. There is a moment, often unseen by others, when the mask begins to fracture. Outwardly, the man still performs strength. He works, he laughs, he distracts himself with noise. But beneath the surface, his inner world is unraveling. The woman's absence is no longer simply her absence. It has become a mirror of every rejection he ever buried, every childhood wound he thought forgotten. The shadow does not differentiate between past and present. It gathers all unhealed pain into one storm and unleashes it the moment he is left alone. Jung described the shadow as not merely the dark, but the unlived, the parts of the self denied and disowned. For many men, this includes vulnerability, dependency, and the raw ache of longing. When a woman stops caring, those disowned parts erupt with vengeance. He hides them because to reveal them would betray his pride. He hides them because the masculine role has been conditioned to equate tenderness with weakness. Yet inside he is torn open by the loss of her attention, as if the air itself has thinned and every breath reminds him of her withdrawal. And here lies a truth that few dare to admit. Men often desire not just the woman herself, but the sanctuary her presence provides. She becomes his refuge, his validation, his escape from the battle he wages within. When that sanctuary closes, the walls of his mind echo with his own demons. He must face what he has long avoided, the emptiness that no lover can fill. His shadow is not her punishment, but his inheritance. For the woman, this silence is not vengeance, but liberation. Her detachment is the natural flowering of self-respect, the quiet refusal to be drained. It is not an act of cruelty, but of survival. Yet to him it feels like betrayal, because he depended on her care as if it were oxygen. He hides the extent of this dependency, ashamed to admit that his strength was never his own, but borrowed from her devotion. The Stoics would recognize this suffering immediately. Marcus Aurelius wrote that, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." When his thoughts were fed by her affection, he painted himself as strong, desirable, whole. But when her affection vanished, the true dye appeared, dark, fractured, unresolved. His shadow showed him what he refused to accept, that he had built his self-image on unstable ground. In his restlessness, he may search for substitutes. He may rush into new connections, hoping another woman's attention can soothe the wound. But the shadow is not fooled. The same emptiness greets him, whispering the same truths. What he hides is that no matter how many faces he turns to, none carry the weight of the one who stopped caring. It is not her uniqueness alone that torments him. It is the way her absence exposed his fragility. And you, perhaps you have seen this cycle unfold. You watched as his words grew sharp, his gestures inconsistent, his energy unsettled. He tried to prove he was unaffected, yet every move betrayed his turmoil. You may have even felt tempted to soothe him, to return just enough to calm the storm, but in doing so, you would only delay the confrontation his soul requires. His shadow must be faced, not avoided. What men often fail to grasp is that a woman's silence is not the end, but an initiation. It is the threshold where he can choose denial or transformation. If he rejects the lesson, he remains trapped in cycles of projection, forever blaming women, forever chasing validation, forever hiding. If he accepts it, he begins the painful but necessary descent into himself, peeling away ego, integrating shadow, and discovering a self that is no longer dependent on another's gaze. Until then, his concealment continues. He hides the nights of obsessive thought, the quiet envy of other men, the longing for her presence even in the moments he swears he is over her. He hides it all because to confess it would expose the truth he dreads most, that the power he once claimed was never real. It was borrowed light, extinguished the moment she stopped caring. And the woman, she does not need to reveal her power. She knows it in her silence. She knows it in her refusal to return. For in her absence, his shadow speaks louder than her voice ever could. The deepest torment of a man left alone with his shadow is not the absence of love, but the confrontation with his own unworthiness. Love, after all, can be sought elsewhere. Affection can be borrowed from new hands, fleeting encounters, temporary distractions. But worthiness, true inner worth, cannot be bought, borrowed, or seduced. It must be forged. And when a woman withdraws her care, when she refuses to rescue him from himself, he is thrust into this crucible of worth. Jung wrote that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. A man abandoned by care often calls his suffering fate. He blames luck, timing, or the woman herself. He hides behind these excuses to protect his ego from collapse. Yet the truth is merciless. It is not fate that punishes him, but the shadow he refused to meet. Every moment of silence from her is a reminder that his unconscious still rules him, that his growth remains unfinished. This is why his obsession becomes so difficult to break. Her absence does not simply leave him lonely. It reawakens every hidden wound, every shadowed truth he buried. The psyche is clever. It uses her as the symbol, the focal point of his unrest. He convinces himself that if she returned, the torment would vanish. But it is not her absence that hurts. It is his shadow, uncovered by her withdrawal, that bleeds. He hides this realization most of all. To accept it would mean admitting that his suffering is not her doing, but his own inheritance. You may have noticed this in the men who once appeared unshakable. Their confidence evaporates when you stop feeding it. Their composure falters when your gaze turns away. They mask the collapse with anger, arrogance, or sudden detachment of their own, but beneath it all the shadow whispers. It whispers that their strength was fragile, that their worth was borrowed, that without you, they must face the emptiness within. What they hide is not indifference but collapse, and here feminine silence reveals its paradoxical power. It is not active, not aggressive, not loud. Yet it destabilizes the entire fortress of the male ego. What swords could not pierce, silence unravels. What arguments could not win, detachment conquers. Because silence is not something he can fight. It offers no opponent, no dialogue, no fuel for his pride. It forces him inward to confront the very battle he has avoided. This is why many women, once they understand their power, never return to begging, convincing, or pleading. They know that words cannot achieve what silence can. They know that to stop caring is not to lose, but to reclaim. The woman who reclaims her energy reminds the man that she was never a possession. She was a mirror. And without her, he must finally decide whether to see himself or continue hiding in the dark. The Stoics, too, would nod at this truth. Epictetus taught that no man can harm you unless you give him access to your soul. The same applies in reverse. No man can save himself if he forever demands another's soul to complete him. A man addicted to a woman's care is not free. He is enslaved. Her silence, painful as it is, offers him the first chance at freedom. Whether he takes it is another matter. Most, however, will not. They will continue to hide, hiding their tears behind laughter, hiding their longing behind conquest, hiding their shame behind arrogance. They will swear they are unaffected, even as their nights betray them. They will insist they are free, even as obsession coils tighter around their hearts. The shadow is relentless. It will not let them go until it is faced. And you, remember this, his silence is not the same as yours. Your silence is power, chosen, rooted in self-respect. His silence is concealment, a desperate attempt to hide the storm within. You do not need to question his true feelings because the shadow never lies. What he hides in words is written in his restless energy, in the obsession he cannot shake. When she stops caring, he is no longer defined by her, but confronted by himself. And it is here, in this confrontation, that the man either breaks or is born anew. There comes a point where the torment reaches a quiet intensity. The outward storms begin to fade, not because he has found peace, but because he has learned to wear his mask more tightly. He convinces the world, and sometimes even himself, that he is unaffected, that her absence no longer matters. Yet this is the most dangerous stage, for beneath the mask, the shadow grows even stronger. Jung warned that what remains unacknowledged does not disappear. It festers, and in the man who hides after her silence, the festering becomes his secret undoing. He hides his fear of being ordinary. Without her attention elevating him, without her affection distinguishing him, he fears he is just another man, common, replaceable, forgettable. This is the wound he cannot confess. Pride forbids it. Yet it is precisely this wound that drives his obsession. Her silence confirmed what he most dreads, that his presence is not indispensable. That knowledge burns like acid in his shadow. Some men turn this burning into cruelty. Unable to integrate their pain, they project it outward. They belittle women, mock commitment, or play games of dominance. They pretend that detachment is their power, when in truth it is their prison. For every attempt to dominate others is only a refusal to dominate the self. And the shadow laughs at their attempts, for it knows that their cruelty is only a mask for weakness. Other men collapse inward. They retreat into self-pity, into addictions, into the quiet despair of unspoken regret. They replay memories not as treasures but as tortures. They imagine her returning, not out of hope, but out of desperation. They live in fantasies, avoiding the confrontation with their own emptiness. Their shadow consumes them slowly like ivy crawling over stone, yet a rare few will choose differently. They will see that the silence is not punishment, but initiation. They will feel the sting of insignificance and decide to build true significance from within. They will realize that the worth they sought in her gaze can only be earned through self-mastery. And so they will turn toward the shadow, not away from it. They will begin the difficult work of integrating what they have hidden, their tenderness, their wounds, their fears. In this confrontation, the anima, the feminine soul within, awakens. And slowly, painfully, they become whole. For the woman, this truth is liberating. She does not need to manipulate, to prove, to beg. Her silence does what words never could. It reveals the hidden landscape of the man's psyche. It shows her whether he will collapse, retaliate, or rise. It frees her from the endless labor of convincing him of her worth, because in her absence, he either discovers his own or remains lost forever. This is why silence, though quiet, is not passive. It is the purest form of power, power that does not chase, does not plead, does not explain. It simply withdraws, and in that withdrawal the truth is revealed. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming whole. A man cannot individuate if he clings to a woman for completion. He must face the shadow himself, or remain half a soul, forever searching, forever hiding, and you perhaps can feel the resonance of this lesson. You may recall the men who pretended strength after you stopped caring, only for their eyes to betray the storm beneath. You may remember the sudden messages, the strange anger, the unexpected longing that surfaced once you withdrew. These were not signs of indifference. They were signs of a shadow awakened. What he hid in pride was written in every restless gesture. The Stoics once more offer clarity. Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." A man who craves endlessly for a woman's attention is impoverished, no matter how powerful he appears. Only when he ceases to crave, when he builds worth from within, does he step into true wealth of the soul. Until then he hides. He hides his poverty behind arrogance, his need behind silence, his obsession behind denial. But the shadow knows. The shadow never hides. So when a woman stops caring, it is not merely an end. It is an unveiling. It shows him who he is without her, who he is when stripped of borrowed power. And in that unveiling lies the crossroads. He will either continue to hide or finally step into the fire of transformation. The shadow is patient. It waits in the dark corners of the psyche, gathering every unhealed memory, every hidden wound, every truth denied. And when the light of a woman's care disappears, the shadow does not hesitate. It rises, sudden and overwhelming, like a tide breaking a fragile dam. What a man hides in this moment is not only his longing for her, but the depth of his unfinished self. He hides the memories of every time he felt unseen, every childhood ache he never confessed, every insecurity he masked with bravado. Her silence is only the spark that ignites these hidden fires. She did not plant the wounds, she only uncovered them. Yet to him, it feels as though her absence created the storm. He hides this truth, because to admit it would strip him of the illusion that he is in control of his suffering. And yet, there is power in the confrontation. Jung believed that within the shadow lies not only darkness, but also gold. The traits we repress are often the very ones that would complete us. For a man, this may include tenderness, emotional honesty, humility, and a deeper capacity to love. But these treasures remain locked away until he faces the shadow directly. When she stops caring, he is handed the key. The question is whether he has the courage to use it. Most do not. They retreat further into denial, wearing thicker masks, chasing more distractions, insisting that they are fine. They live lives of quiet obsession, forever haunted by the woman whose silence revealed them to themselves. They will call her unforgettable, but what they truly mean is that the shadow she awakened has never been put back to sleep. Some will lash out in anger. Unable to bear the weight of their inner collapse, they project their pain onto her. They will call her cold, cruel, heartless, as if labeling her could silence their own despair. But projection is the favorite game of the unconscious. In blaming her, he avoids himself, yet his shadow knows the truth. It was not her silence that destroyed him, but his own refusal to face the emptiness it revealed. And you, hearing this, may feel a recognition deep within. You may recall how his energy shifted when you detached, how the man who once appeared unshakable grew restless, inconsistent, unsettled. Perhaps he accused you, or perhaps he withdrew further, but beneath it all, you could sense it. The shadow had been awakened, and he was running from it as fast as he could. What he hid in words was betrayed by his restless silence. The Stoics would see this clearly. Marcus Aurelius taught that the obstacle is not outside us, but within. Her silence is not the true obstacle, it is the mirror. The real challenge is his own unmastered self. A man who cannot bear to be ignored has not mastered his mind. He is still enslaved by the craving for external affirmation. He hides this enslavement with pride, but it is enslavement nonetheless, and for the woman the lesson is equally sharp. She is not responsible for healing what he has buried. Her care may have softened his wounds for a time, but true healing does not come from another's devotion. It comes from the descent into one's own darkness. Her silence is not cruelty, but truth. It reveals to him that what he needs cannot be taken from her. It must be built within. When she stops caring, he faces a choice. He can continue hiding, repeating the same cycles with new faces, forever escaping, forever haunted. Or he can step into the fire of his shadow, confront what he has denied, and emerge transformed. Few will choose the fire, but those who do discover something extraordinary: freedom. Freedom from obsession, freedom from projection, freedom from the endless hunger for validation. They discover that their worth is not dependent on her gaze, but rooted in their own soul. And paradoxically, it is only then, when he no longer depends on her, that he is truly capable of love. Until that day, he hides. He hides his tears behind laughter, his hunger behind pride, his obsession behind silence. But the shadow never hides. It waits, patient, unrelenting, reminding him that every time a woman stops caring, The truth is revealed once more. His battle is not with her, but with himself. The silence has stretched long enough. In its stillness, a man begins to sense that what he has been hiding all along is not weakness, but possibility. For behind the shadow, behind the raw ache of abandonment and the sting of indifference, lies a threshold. Jung called it individuation, the great task of becoming whole, not by clinging to another, but by integrating every lost piece of the self. When she stops caring, the mirror no longer flatters him. It no longer feeds his illusions. He is left alone with the man he truly is, stripped of the projections, stripped of the masks. This is the moment where many falter, because the silence of a woman is not only the absence of her voice, it is the presence of his truth. And truth, when unprepared, can feel like death. But death, in the language of the soul, is only transformation. What he hides in his shadow is not merely grief, it is the very material of rebirth. His longing, his shame, his vulnerability, his tenderness, all of these are not enemies, but exiled allies. To welcome them back is to discover his full humanity. To reject them is to remain a half-formed echo, forever needing someone else to complete what he refuses to claim. And the woman, in her quiet withdrawal, embodies something archetypal. She becomes the initiator, the catalyst of his descent. By ceasing to care, she offers him the harshest gift, the chance to meet himself. She becomes less a figure of romance and more a figure of fate, a living reminder that no one can walk into his shadow for him. The work is his alone. For some men, this realization arrives too late. They spend years chasing ghosts, trying to replace her care with another's, trying to outrun the silence that lingers in their bones. But for others, the silence cracks them open. They learn that their worth was never meant to be measured by her affection, nor by her absence. They learn that freedom is not given, but chosen. And here lies the great paradox. The very moment he stops needing her is the moment he becomes capable of true love. No longer grasping, no longer dependent, no longer enslaved by the fear of her detachment, he is finally free to give without demand. But to arrive here, he must surrender the illusions of control, the addiction to external validation, the endless struggle to escape his own shadow. What he hides in his shadow when she stops caring is the seed of his transformation. It is the invitation to grow beyond the boy who needed to be seen, into the man who sees himself. It is the test that separates the distracted from the awakened, the restless from the grounded, the half-made from the whole. And for her, there is also liberation. She learns that her silence is not cruelty but boundary, not punishment but truth. She is reminded that she is not a nurse to the wounds he refuses to heal, not a mirror for the fragments he denies, not a hostage to the storm of his shadow. She is sovereign, and her detachment is an act of self-respect. Together their story is one of endings and beginnings. His shadow waits for him to enter. Her silence waits for him to rise. Whether he accepts the invitation or not is beyond her responsibility. It belongs to him. It always has.